You're listening to Harrowsmith Radio. Hey there, I'm your host, Wayne MacPhail. This episode takes us down on the farms. First to a sheep farm near Perth where we learn about the capricious rhythms of Mother Nature from a farmer and cello instructor. Next to a Dr. Dolittle of a farm jubilant with animals and abuzz with newly hived bees lost in their own dances and rhythms. All in all, a timely podcast that gets us back to our roots. By the way, if you want to read Harrowsmith magazine instead of listen to it, you can subscribe to the print version online at harrowsmithmag.com. And you can find Harrowsmith magazine on selected newsstands across Canada. But for now, settle in for the next half hour of Harrowsmith Radio. When we last spoke to Sarah Lawton of Drover's Way Farm in Lanark County, she was lamenting the love-hate relationship with water she had because it both drowned her tractor and gave life to the crops and livestock that she keeps. This time out, I speak with the veteran farmer and cellist about an elegy to nature's pace, cadence, and rhythms she wrote for Harrowsmith. The poetic piece beautifully captures the close experience-wrought relationship farmers have with the sometimes capricious beat and syncopation of the seasons. It's a bond, an enslavement, and an understanding that those of us in urban centers have all but lost. But for farmers like Sarah, who rush to take advantage of a 6-hour planting window or lament the dying of an even smaller shaving of light in the fall, the intimate dance with Mother Nature has to be minded with each and every passing measure. Here's our conversation.
I'm Sarah Loten, and I farm on a farm near Perth, Ontario, the town of Perth, Ontario, in Lanark County, and our farm is called Drover's Way Farm.
Now, you've got a really big farm. Drover's Way's farm is over 500 acres now, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah, and we have quite a bit of livestock. Primarily sheep is our main thing. We have other things. We also have an equine business on property, but the actual farm proper is really more about the sheep and producing market lambs. And it's also, we produce crops. Our primary goal, again, is to feed the sheep, but we do sell excess that's not needed for feeding the animals. So definitely not the largest, but we are one of the larger sheep farms in Ontario for sure, but not the largest by any stretch of the imagination.
So I want to talk about the piece that you wrote for Harrowsmith about life on the farm all year round. And what really struck me when I read the piece is it's very elegiacal, very poetic. You know, it's a lovely essay about the exploration of time and rhythm and seasons. And I was really intrigued when I learned that you are a cello player and a musicologist and a music instructor. So can you talk a little bit about how you view the relationship of rhythm in music, particularly in classical music with cello, which is often very much sort of a continuo beneath stuff when it's not a solo instrument. So talk to me about that and the relationship you see with that kind of musical rhythm and the rhythm of seasons.
As a cellist, just coming from that point of view, I think you're always a team player. Well, I shouldn't say always. I mean, you do have your moments of solo shine as well, but and it is a beautiful instrument, but it's very close to the human voice, and you're right, it's very much you're often part of the team and not always the melody, but yet a very supporting and important role when you're playing in groups, right? And often people are drawn to the sound, and I guess that's why I'm drawn to the sound too. But I think rhythm and dance, to me, goes even beyond my life as a classically trained cellist, and I certainly played in other idioms as well as classical music, but I think that rhythm and dance is just the essence of who we are as human beings. Like, I think from the time we're tiny, We learn to walk in a rhythm, and our heart beats in a rhythm, and our way of functioning through the days. We develop a rhythm, and I don't mean it's like clockwork, like a schedule that's imposed by some child expert or anything, but it is like something that has to happen because it's just so much a pattern of who we are as humans, and also the patterns that are in nature. So I'm acutely aware of that rhythm and the need to attune to it, I guess, because rhythm also changes. I mean, your heartbeat gets faster as you work more, or nature's rhythm changes as it goes through different seasons, which is what I'm talking about in this article. As a cello player, you're constantly tuning into everybody around you in your rhythm. And then when I'm teaching, I'm tuning into my students and what they need. And interestingly enough, I've worked with a lot of children with learning disabilities and disabilities, and often a sense of rhythm is something you have to work harder to develop with them, because if that's lacking, that can affect so many things in the way people approach life. So I think it's sort of one of those things that we fundamentally have to develop and tune to if we want to exist in the world we're in, whether it be in nature or music or with other people. So for me, it's a critical piece to that dance. I call it a dance because I just love the idea, the image of it, but you can call it playing music with, but it's a critical piece to working with a farm. In the past, when I've sometimes, especially in all my, huge intelligence as I thought I had, I first started farming 20 some years ago, I sometimes wouldn't tune into that rhythm and dance very effectively. I was just bound and determined to do my own rhythm because I thought that was the right thing to do. And it doesn't work. Like, you really have to continually dance. It's not, you have to work with, because I think we're very much a part of what's going on around us, and that attunement is just absolutely critical, especially, and it's counterproductive not to tune into it.
So one of the things that struck me in the piece was that, we're talking about rhythm, and you were talking earlier about the changing speed of heartbeats and stuff. Sometimes hearts go arrhythmic, right? And sometimes nature is capricious, to pick up on the dance idea. And one of the images that really struck me in the piece was the image of you baling hay by the light of the moon because there was a storm coming, and that you were afraid that you were going to lose the crop. And there's a great example of Mother Nature being capricious and not being, terribly concerned about what you need or the timing or the rhythm that you have to pay attention to, right?
Yeah, because I think it's interesting when I first started farming, I was used to, like everybody else out there who's gone through school and done other work, you're very aware of deadlines and the importance of them. But, there's always some sort of sense of that deadlines can also be shifted with like with the proper discussion or, negotiation or whatever. There's absolutely no negotiation with nature when it comes to deadlines. If it's going to rain, it's going to rain.
Yeah.
And, the weather report might say it's happening at 2 p.m., but that doesn't mean that at 2 p.m. you can count on that rain starting or even stopping, right? I mean, it may decide to come in at 1:30 or whatever. The deadlines that is such an absolute deadline that don't even try to play with it, right? It's just if you sense something's going to change, then get onto it. And I've never felt that sort of, and I have mentioned to people too, often you literally will have a sort of a 6-hour window to get a crop in, or an 8-hour window, 12 hours. You might get lucky. Some years you might get several days, but you really, like when you see farmers working in the middle of the night with the lights on, they're not, being heroic or workaholics. They just literally know that this is my moment. If I don't do it, I miss my chance, and I might miss my chance. You might get lucky and you might have another chance, but you might not. So in difficult years especially, you really don't have any choice. And I think it's that pressure is a very huge pressure on some levels. So you have to learn to dance with it, because otherwise the pressure can get to you, as it does with some farmers. But if you realize that it just is what it is and work with it, I think that's generally a better way to approach it. So yeah, it's always struck me that deadlines and seasonality, I call it, in farming is absolute. And the patterns are pretty, you definitely get different years, there's no doubt. But the patterns I can pretty consistently, for instance, count on our area having significant enough grass per pasture by about May 15th, give or take a few days. And no matter what the spring does, I can pretty much count on that. So whether it's colder or earlier or later or whatever. So it's interesting how the plants and animals definitely respond in a very specific set of, in a specific way every year.
One of the things that I'm interested in the way that you wrote the piece and your relationship to the changing rhythms and the patterns that you talked about is I don't get a sense that you were writing it from a position of it being mystical or religious, maybe a little bit spiritual, but certainly what I read was a farmer who is absolutely grounded and practical and is not saying, I feel this because of a spirit moving me. It's because I've done this for 20 years and I know this rhythm. I know how to play this piece, right?
Yeah, I think because, like all farmers, we've gone through hard times and better times. And I think I'm not trying to applaud myself here or anything, but I think if you've done farming and found your way of doing it successfully or a way that's true to you, both of which are important, I think that you're very attuned, your senses are very acute. Like you just really, like we have all these computer programs now that can tell us so much, and that's useful to a point, but ultimately it's just more information, and I still think our senses, I think most farmers would agree, our senses are really what tells us what we need to know. And I think that's probably true for all human beings and many jobs. But we often don't give it credence or as much value as we should. But I think with farming, it's absolutely critical. Like when I walk into a field or a pasture and I'm looking at a group of animals or I'm looking at a crop, I'm very aware of the entire environment around me, and I'm very much a part of that. And I think we all are. I just think that in farming, we just become even that much more aware that that's the case. Like I can, read a bunch of data on my animals, and I have RFID tags and all the fancy doodads that everybody else has. But it really, what's going to tell me what I need to know is when I look at a group of animals, how are you doing? Like I can think that is so, critical to how I do things. If you don't do that, you're going to start losing money for just sheer practical reasons, or animals don't do well, or plants don't do well. But the other thing is it's spiritual in the sense that I truly believe that we are part and parcel of our natural environment. Like I think we are just one of the many animals out there fighting for our turf and our needs so that side is maybe spiritual in the sense that I think we are really all connected.
One of the things when you talked about the understanding and knowing, one of the things that really struck me is that it's very similar to Malcolm Gladwell's idea of this sort of intuition that comes from having 10,000 hours. I think that's the number he picks out of experience, that once you garner years and years and years of experience and have been on the wheel of the seasons over and over again, that intuition is bred from all of those years of experience, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and then maybe a certain amount of giving yourself, and maybe if that's experience to give you yourself permission to take that information in. Like I think when I was younger, I probably would have questioned myself a bit more and said, well, this, when I did this course, they told me that I should, do forage by this date, and there's typically statistically 5 days of sunshine in June, that should allow me to make hay. And so, that kind of thing. But I mean, it doesn't matter what the textbook says and what the statistic is if in the here and the now you're dealing with snow
right.
or whatever, right? So it's definitely based on experience, and experience is based on just mistakes and figuring things out and following your intuition, but sometimes not getting it right and sometimes getting it right, and learning. I remember an older farmer telling me, don't keep on dipping in the same bucket don't keep on fishing out of the same bucket if it's not giving you any fish.
Right.
And I think that's kind of, very practical. And then lately I've also just got such an awareness of how connected and interconnected I am with everything that's around me. And I've always felt that, but lately I'm allowing myself to say, yeah, this is just so true. Like you can argue all you want with nature, or Mother Nature as I call it in the article. But she will ultimately has more strength and power, and we're just sort of part of that wheel turning, right? So we have to kind of keep turning with it.
So I want to talk a little bit more about your relationship with time, because you were talking about, that you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to these rhythms and the time. That I think that folks that are living in urban settings can be very dismissive of, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. It doesn't really matter. It's getting a little later at night, or the sun's coming up a little earlier. But as you point out in the piece, you're very aware that you have 5 minutes less light today than you did 2 days ago.
Yeah. Like I was saying in the article that I have to round up the sheep, muster the sheep every evening with my border collie herding dog, and I do that mostly just to keep the coyotes at bay because they tend to be particularly aggressive around dusk and overnight. And again, the sheep behavior, naturally, instinctively, they actually gather themselves anyway. So I kind of take advantage of that and bring them into a tighter zone where they can be protected by the dogs. So it's absolutely critical to keeping the safety of the flock, in one piece. Otherwise, we could lose literally an animal or two a night if we didn't do something like that. So I have to, it doesn't really matter whether I have a course suddenly starting at 6 o'clock or 7 or whatever. I absolutely have to go out at this kind of time just before dusk when the animals will start gathering naturally, because their instinct then will allow me to kind of use the dog to gather the whole gang, because it's a lot of work for one dog to gather that many sheep within 20 minutes or so. And so I'm so aware, and as we go from, say, the middle of the summer in July or into June or whatever, which is the peak of the daylight hours, to, say, daylight savings time, it's totally irrelevant, really. It's the daylight changing that is really affecting my work. So, yeah, my days get shorter and shorter and shorter in terms of the hours that I'm outside. So the availability of time to do other things during the middle of the day becomes tighter and tighter too. So I'm keenly aware of those extra 5-10 minutes. And I'm far from brilliant about, everybody around me knows about being on time for things that are scheduled, but I am very keenly aware of how I need to be on time for those things, because again, absolute deadlines, right? Right. You can't argue with the sun setting. Right.
So what do you think that folks who, like me, who live in an urban environment and are sort of lackadaisical about time, what can we learn from somebody like you who has spent so long working so hard to stay in tune and stay up with the capricious nature and keep dancing even though the rhythm underneath your feet is changing?
Well, I think as a human being, for your own self-nurturing or your edification or whatever you want to call it, self-nurturing is probably a better term, nourishing, I think it's so important. We are so much a part of this sort of cycle of nature, right? And I think we kind of shut that down, and it's so shut down for us often, especially if you're functioning in artificial environments where there's artificial lights and mass and environments that don't allow for... But nature is everywhere. Like even in the middle of downtown Toronto or wherever, there are trees, there are birds, there are things that you can become aware of. The wind is still there, the sun is still there, the light is still there. So I think it's so important for us to not disconnect ourselves from that as human beings, because I think the more disconnected we become, regardless of farming or regardless of what work you do, I think it's just so valuable to how we feel in our bodies, basically, if we're in tune. And I see that, and I say that because I see that with the animals. Like if I have an animal that's a little sickly, or I've bottle lambs, for instance, that a little bit compromised in health, I pop them outside, and my kids will look at me and say, "Oh my gosh, Mom, it's it's only 10 degrees or 5 degrees, and aren't they going to get chilled out there?" And I said, they are way healthier outside with the UV and the sunlight and the wind and the breeze blowing away all the germs and all the things that are kind of affecting them and them getting fresh air. I think that is so much more vital than what we think is healthy, which is putting an animal in a warm environment or a covered area or whatever. So but I don't think we're any different as humans. I think that attunement is so important. And in terms of timing, I think you just become aware of, I think our bodies respond to that. I mean, we all, a lot of us will say that we get a little sleepier, or it's darker, or you might feel a little bit more kind of down as the daylight hours close in on us. But I think that's so much just if we just accept it as part of nature, that's what animals do. Yes, everything does go into dormancy and go into quieter kind of mode, and that's totally okay. It's just it's so in conflict with the modern world because it's 9 to 5 and it's nonstop and it's artificial light, but I still think we have to allow ourselves some space in our lives to do that. I think it's really critical for mental and physical health for us and for our animals if we're farming.
Well, thanks very much for that advice, and thank you for dancing so deftly for the past 20 years on your farm, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a lovely conversation to have. Thank you.
That was Sarah Lawton, who managed to chat with me in the 20 minutes before the sheep were bleating her name. Nicole Robertson loves animals. Well, that's like saying Wimpy is partial to hamburgers, really. She's got goats and horses and, well, a whole menagerie at Caberneigh Farms in Uxbridge. A couple of years ago, she added bees to her collection, and they have been paying her back in spades. Here's our conversation that will be sweet comfort to anyone who's thinking about getting hives. Well, the good kind, anyway.
My name is Nicole Robertson, and I live in Uxbridge, Ontario at Caberneigh Farms.
Now, Caberneigh Farms seems kind of like Dr. Dolittle's vacation retreat, right? You've got all sorts of animals there, right?
I think that's the general consensus of everyone that knows us. We have horses, we have goats, we have chickens, we have a pig, we have dogs, we have cats, and of course we have bees.
And the bees is what I want to focus on today. So this is you're coming into your third season of having bees, right?
As best as I can calculate, yes.
Yes, okay. So you're a relative newcomer to having bees, and that's what I want to talk about is if you're a newcomer, if you're thinking this is the year that I'm going to have bees in my garden or bees on my farm or whatever. So take me back to when you first got bees. What were you thinking? Why did you want to have them, and what did you discover about them at first?
Well, we wanted to have them, I think, for the same reason a lot of people do. I mean, we were thinking about the environmental piece. We were thinking about the pollinator piece. And curiously, honey was probably the least part of it for us. I mean, we love it, don't get me wrong, but that wasn't really the primary driver. But we seem to have an ideal location for it. You know, we've got 50 acres. We've got a lot of flowering plants, a lot of flowering trees, and it seemed like a logical next addition for us. Getting into bees is a trick because it can be overwhelming, and I don't know if it needs to be, but it sure can be.
At first, what was overwhelming for you?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that I always advise people now is don't get drunk on YouTube videos, because there is just so much on YouTube about bees that it can kind of stop you in your tracks if you're not careful. I always kid with my friends that horses were our gateway animals, so after that everything is easy. But I think sometimes people just get overwhelmed by the amount of information. The positive thing, though, is bees have been doing this for a really long time, and they don't need us that much. So that was a real help for me.
Right. So how did you go about getting bees?
Well, the first thing, and this is what I would recommend anybody interested in doing this does, is the first thing I did was sign up for your basic beekeeping course. And most small towns or locales will have a beekeeping club or a beekeeping organization that can direct you to courses. You can call some of these apiaries or stores that specialize in selling bee equipment. They usually have courses, and that's a really sort of positive way to start. It just gives you an overview of what's going on. Some of them are half a day long. I did a full day, and before that I had ordered, you kind of do this online a lot of times, you order what's called, you can either order a full hive, you can order what's called a nuke, which is like an abbreviated hive with a queen and workers in it. You know, we did the nuke route. And so after the day of the course, I went home with 2 hives full of bees in the backseat of my car, which might have been a mistake, but we managed.
So let's talk about the equipment and the expense. So, you know, bees included, what kind of expense are we looking at with the little smoking kettle thing and the mask and everything? Like, what are we talking about?
Well, you know, when you think about what's involved, you're obviously going to need your bees. So if you buy a nuke, you're probably looking at a couple of $100s for the actual bees themselves. Then you have to buy your woodware, which is the hive that they live in, and the frames inside there. And bees have sort of an area where they live and make babies and put brood in, and then other woodware or boxes where they store the honey. Those are often referred to as supers. So you're going to want to buy woodware, the smoker kettle that you referred to. Most people buy a full suit, you know, the veil, the space suit kind of thing.
Yep.
Some people, I just wear a veil and a jacket. You're probably looking between $500 and $600, I think, if you start with, say, 2 hives, maybe a little more with 2.
Wow.
And it's really great to start with 2 hives, because otherwise it's very hard in the beginning to get a sense of how well your hive is doing if it's all by itself.
So did you get honey the first year?
We did, actually, and I think a lot of what I've read and seen is often you don't get much honey, but actually we surprisingly did, and a pretty decent haul as well. And that is seriously exciting. And it's also the most work you'll probably do in the beehive at all is when you extract the honey.
How much, when you say you got a big haul, like what's a big haul from 2 hives?
Well, I think from 2, hives that have been in production for a while, like last year we were getting, maybe 50 pounds a hive.
Wow.
But that first year we probably got, it adds up. The first year we probably got between 25 and 30.
That's pretty amazing, given that the bees themselves have to do something with it, right?
Well, you want to leave them honey so they can winter on it. So that's why you separate the brood boxes and where they store theirs, and then you have these honey supers where the queen can't get to, and then they'll store a lot of honey there. But you sure want to make sure you leave them enough honey so they can overwinter. And again, we're not in it for the commercial side of it, so we probably erred on the side of caution, but they had plenty to get through the winter.
Well, it sounds like anybody that wants to do this could do it for, as you did, for environmental reasons, for pollinator reasons, but it also sounds like it is really pretty productive and pretty valuable in terms of creating a foodstuff. It
makes you a really excellent dinner gift, because that becomes the host or hostess gift every time you go out. For us, between the chickens and the blue and green and brown eggs we bring and the honey, we have more dinner invitations than ever.
Thank you very much for sharing the information about honey, and I'm sure that people listening to this podcast are going to be inviting you for dinner for sure now.
Let's hope so.
Okay.
And thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me.
No problem. Thanks. That was Nicole Robertson coming by for dinner here any day now. So, here we are at the end of this episode of Harrowsmith Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to this podcast on Apple iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. And please, tell your friends and family. Got feedback? We'd love to hear it. You can email us at letters@harrowsmithmag.com. That URL, harrowsmithmag.com, is also where you can order subscriptions online. And you can find Harrowsmith Magazine on selected newsstands across Canada. Until next time, for Harrowsmith Radio, I'm Wayne MacPhail. And also, until next time, remember these 4 words: make, grow, sustain, share. Tune in for the next episode of Harrowsmith Radio.